Coahuila, situated in the northern part of Mexico, shares its borders with the United States, Texas, to the north, Chihuahua to the west, Durango to the southwest, Zacatecas and San Luis Potosí to the south, and Nuevo León to the east. Covering an area of 151,595 square kilometers, Coahuila ranks as the third largest state in Mexico, representing 7.7% of the country's total territory. The Iridilas and Laguneros. According to Peter Gerhard, The North Frontier of New Spain, 1982, a missionary who knew the Paris region in 1595 wrote that the original inhabitants of the area were Iridilas, and Marranos. Both groups are identified with the people who were later called Laguneros or Salineros, who extended westward to the vicinity of Cerro Gordo. Inhabiting the Laguna de Paris, San Pedro, the Laguneros, also known as the Iridilas, were described by the Spaniards as lake people, because they occupied the lakes of the tablelands of Mapimi. They were believed to have been an Aztecoidan branch of the Uto-Aztecan stock, but this is not certain. The Indians lived primarily from fishing, hunting, and gathering, but they probably also sowed maize around the lockshores as floodwaters receded. They are now extinct. Tobosos. The linguist John Reed Swanton regarded the Toboso Indians as a predatory tribe living in the 17th century in the Bolson de Mapimi and extending northward at least to the Rio Grande. From their positions in both Coahuila and Chihuahua, the Tobosos frequently raided Spanish settlements to the east in Coahuila and Nuevo León. Some evidence originally linked the Tobosos with the Athapascans and Apaches, but more recent research has produced enough evidence to indicate that the Toboso language was probably Uto-Aztecan. The Toboso were organized by bands. Although there were 12 known bands in the 1680s, by 1693, the Spaniards were only able to identify 4 surviving Toboso bands, the Osateagliglas, Guazapeagliglas, Chichitames, and Sisimbals. By 1800 the Tobosos had been absorbed into the Spanish colonial society. However, some Tobosos migrated to coastal Texas where they resided in and near Mission Nuestra Señora del Refugio during the early decades of the 19th century. The Guachicailes, of all the Chichimeca Indians, occupied the most extensive territory, extending some 100,000 square kilometers from Lake Chapala, Jalisco, in the south to Saltillo, Coahuila, in the north. Considered both warlike and brave, the Guachicailes roamed through a large section of the present-day state of Zacatecas. The Aztecs used the term Guachicail as a reference to heads painted of red, a reference to the red dye that they used to paint their bodies, faces, and hair. The Guachical group of tribes is regarded as connected with the present-day Huacal language group of Jalisco and Nayarit, and has been classified as part of the Aztecoidan division of the Uto-Aztecan linguistic family. The Guachicailes and their Chichimeca cousins, the Zacatecos, waged the 40-year War 1550–1590, known as the Chichimeca War, against Spanish forces, primarily in the vast region south of Coahuila, Zacatecas, northern Jalisco, Aguascalientes, western San Luis Potosí, and Guanajuato. They were never decisively defeated in battle, but were pacified through gifts that included many of the materials used by Spaniards and its civilized Indians to live and thrive in their Spanish settlements. The Zacatecos were an indigenous tribe related to the Cascan of the Aztecoidan family and Uto-Aztecan stock, occupying a large part of the state of Zacatecas and smaller portions of eastern Durango and southern Coahuila. They were bordered by the Iridilas and Laguneros on the north, the Tepehuan on the west, and the Guachicail on the east. On the south, they were bordered by the Cora and Cascan. According to David Fry, northeastern Mexico, by 1620, some elements of the Zacatecos had moved farther north to live among indigenous groups in the mission town of Paris in the aftermath of the Chichimeca War. The Conchos have been described in great detail by several researchers. They were named for the Spanish word for shells, a likely reference to the many shellfish found in the Conchos River. The Concho Indians lived near the junction of the Rio Concho River and Rio Grande rivers in northern Chihuahua. However, the Conchos are also believed to have extended their reach into the modern-day state of Coahuila. The Conchos were placed by Mason and Johnson in the Terra-Cajetian division of the Uto-Aztecan linguistic stock, with 2 major subdivisions, the Chinara around the Salt Lakes and Sand Dunes of northern Chihuahua, and the Chizo, an eastern subdivision that inhabits the area east of the Concho and near the Big Bend of the Rio Grande. In 1934, Kroeber placed the Concho in the Cajito-Opata-Tarahumara group, most closely related to Opata and less so with the Tarahumara. Chizos. As indicated above, the Chizos, or Chizos, were a subdivision of the Conchos that lived in the eastern Conchiria, occupying northeastern Chihuahua and northwestern Coahuila. They were nomadic desert people that raided Spanish settlements in the 1600s and frequently allied themselves with other nomadic groups. According to William Griffin, during the 1650s and up to the 1684 revolt, the Chizos were reported to be in a state of war with the Conchos, Julimes, Mummets, and the Spaniards. In 1673, a large number of Chizos arrived at San Francisco de Conchos mission, stating that they wanted to settle down and embrace the Catholic faith. Apaches. In the north, the Spanish frontier met the Apache southward expansion. In the first half of the 17th century, Apaches acquired horses from Spanish colonists of New Mexico and achieved dominance of the southern plains. The Apache expansion was intensified by the Pueblo Indian Revolt of 1680, when the Apaches lost their prime source of horses and shifted south to prey on Spanish settlements in Coahuila. Juan Dominguez de Mendoza recorded the names of numerous Indian groups east of the lower Pecos River that were displaced by Apaches. In 1780, the Comanches from the north began to harass the Apaches with raids that reached as far south as Monclova. As a result, the Apaches moved toward the coastal plain of Texas and became known as the Lipan Apaches. The Lipans in turn displaced the last Indian groups native to southern Texas, most of whom went to the Spanish missions in the San Antonio area. By 1790, the Spaniards had turned their attention from the Aboriginal groups and focused on containing the Apache invaders in Coahuila, Chihuahua, and Texas. The Coahuiltecan tribes were made up of hundreds of autonomous bands of hunter-gatherers who ranged over the eastern part of Coahuila, northern Tamaulipas, Nuevo Leon, and southern Texas south and west of San Antonio River and Cibolo Creek. It was the practice of the Coahuiltecans to move from one traditional campsite to another, following the seasons and herds of migrating animals. According to Frederick Henry Ruecking's master's thesis for the University of Texas in 1955, certain Coahuiltecan bands were clustered around a central, dominant band. Referred to as band clusters, these groups were bound together by 1. Geographic proximity, 2. Historic association, 3. Cultural or linguistic affinity, and/or 4. A similarity in band names. In his thesis, Ruecking recognized 8 band clusters, suggested 3 more and indicated 4 others as possibilities. The map on the following page shows the location of the Tobosos, Iridilas, and Guachiquiles in southern and western Coahuila at the time of the Spanish contact. The Tobosos inhabited the Bolson de Mapimay, which straddles western Coahuila and eastern Chihuahua, while the Iridilas and Guachiquiles had territories within the southern part of the state.